Happy Father's Day. Pedro Pascal is daddy. Am I right? So says the internet, particularly reaching a fever pitch when the first season of The Last of Us aired back in 2023. Many people found Pedro as Joel from The Last of Us to be desirable based on his performance, and I get it. Look at the guy and watch any of his interesting, hilarious, and warm interviews, and you'll see. I, for one, am particularly fond of the moment from Vanity Fair's lie detector test when he admits he follows Pedro Pascal fan account and looks at it when he is feeling down. But I'm interested in how this particular role of Joel informed people's desire for the man, Pedro Pascal. The role is one of a dad who lost his daughter and then spent years walling off his nurturing nature until he meets Ellie, a girl who starts as nothing more than cargo he needs to transport to the Fireflies for some unknown reason, who eventually becomes the substitute daughter for whom he would do anything. He does, as I talked about in another video essay, link in the bio, let his love for Ellie justify the worst of human crimes, murder. He guns down the entire resistance movement in the world of The Last of Us, including doctors, to save Ellie, who is immune to the zombie threat and about to undergo a surgery that would generate a cure, but end her life. He murders to save her, even though Ellie desperately craves purpose and would willingly sacrifice herself for the cause. When he finally admits what he has done to Ellie some 5 years later, in this most recent season of The Last of Us, Joel says he would do it all again, if given a second chance at that moment, even if Ellie now turns away from him, because he loves Ellie in a way she can't understand. As it's then implied, a parent loves a child. This father-daughter bond strikes me as interesting within the context of the desire and fan culture surrounding Pedro Pascal, and among other, quote, daddies in our media landscape. More recently, I'm thinking of Noah Weil as Dr. Robby on The Pitt, who is also getting a fair amount of attention online at the moment. But I'm also interested in this phenomena in light of the fact that Ellie is a queer character, and not just coded as queer, but explicitly queer. Our interest in fathers and a surrogate father-daughter bond isn't new. And some might argue that the queer coding of these female characters isn't new either. When I thought about Joel and Ellie's dynamic, I saw echoes of their bond in other older male, young female, tomboyish pairings. The first story that came to mind was True Grit, a film that's been made twice, 2010 and once in 1969, and was also based on a 1968 novel. It tells the tale of a 14-year-old girl hiring a man to avenge the murder of her own father. Crucially, the 14-year-old girl Maddie has, well, grit. She's not some little girl, but a force in her own right who is setting out to get an adult, coded masculine goal of revenge accomplished. And that's not the only comparable example. Moses and Addie from 1973's Paper Moon, Leon and Matilda from 1994's The Professional, Denzel and Dakota in Man on Fire in 2004, Eric and Hanna in 2011's Hanna, Logan and Wolverine from 2017's Logan. I admittedly haven't seen all of these, but from what I have seen and heard, there seems to be something about the young female characters in these films that does set them apart. They're precocious, emotionally complex and mature, tough, special in some way that makes them a worthy companion for the gruff, older, often damaged, reticent, and violent male protector by their side. Together they face high-stakes, morally gray circumstances and develop a bond that is deep and resonant for audiences. It seems especially resonant for female audiences, who are drawn to the interesting blend of danger and tenderness, harm and protection found in the men in question. But that blend is only found because of the character's connection to the othered, queer-coded, or just plain queer little girl. It's not sexualized or about romance, but it is a powerful elixir that can stir our desires. I'd even argue this archetype of sorts is even more fundamental to our storytelling, having analogous comparisons in great literature too. We have our classics that are primarily about romance, featuring independent stand-apart female heroines like Jane Eyre and Elizabeth Bennet, and they're usually older, closed-off, and difficult male counterparts like Mr. Rochester and Mr. Darcy. These are templates for the kinds of pop romance books that may or may not be flooding your book talk. And then we have the explicitly or implied paternal bonds explored by, say, George Eliot and Silas Marner via Eppie and Silas, or Shakespeare in The Tempest via Prospero and Miranda, Lear and Cordelia in King Lear, Angelo and Isabella in Measure for Measure, and Shylock and Jessica in The Merchant of Venice. In short, the mentor/ward or guardian/orphan dynamic is one we can find many places, and it's not exclusively tied to men and girls. Robinson Crusoe and Friday from Robinson Crusoe, and Magwitch and Pip, or even Miss Havisham and Estella from Great Expectations come to mind. So our interest in these pairings and the fact that Pascal has taken off as an internet boyfriend isn't all that shocking. There's a long-standing cultural and narrative precedent for it, perhaps priming us to respond in exactly this way. And yet there's something great about identifying a trope in a piece of current media you love, precisely because you get to see what the old tells us about our world today. So yes, daddies or father figures who have a penchant for violence on behalf of and in service to queer-coded orphan girls is a tale as old as time, something we as humans seem to enjoy writing about and reacting to through the years. But this version of our mentor slash ward or guardian slash orphan isn't like the others. In The Last of Us, or even in Pedro Pascal's other popular show exploring the same kind of dynamic, The Mandalorian, Pascal's character is violent and emotionally damaged or reserved. Pedro Pascal, the man, however, out in the quote, real world, or at least out on the press circuit, seems to exude a very different, gentle, emotionally available persona. This suggests to me that we're in a moment that's assessing masculinity in a bifurcated kind of way. Without getting bogged down in the depressing details, we're in a political moment that seems to value or at least allow an older, more toxic and aggressive conception of masculinity to reign. And yet fan culture seems obsessed with men who don't eschew vulnerability, softness, the very kinds of qualities that some might associate with the feminine. Earlier, I brought up Noah Wile's character, Dr. Robby from The Pitt, a new medical drama. This is a man who is seen as a leader within the world of the show, not just by virtue of his job, but because he can usually access his emotions and respond to the feelings he feels and encounters within the life and death stakes of the emergency room. We several times see him bring the doctors and other staff members together to process loss or difficult moments over the course of the show's first season. What's interesting, however, is that each episode of the show is an hour over the course of a single ER shift. This first season covers the entire shift on a particularly dark day for Dr. Robby, the anniversary of the death of his own mentor during the COVID-19 pandemic. A day Dr. Robby usually takes off, but hasn't for some reason this time around. As the day in the season continues, many characters notice that something is off with Dr. Robby. He's harsher, occasionally dismissive or unkind, and towards the latter half of the season, too invested in saving someone with a connection to his personal life who is too far gone during a moment when resources are sorely needed by the ER. This all culminates in Dr. Robby having a PTSD-like breakdown in the very room where his mentor once died. He's ultimately found and comforted by a younger, also somewhat soft male doctor, Dr. Whitaker. At the end of the show, Dr. Robby tells his coworkers to cry, saying it's just grief leaving the body. I think this show has popped off and Dr. Robby has become another of the internet's boyfriends because they are speaking to an untapped need in audiences during this toxic masculine moment in our world. We want a guy who can access his emotions, even if he sometimes struggles with them and falls prey to a closing off or a lashing out that can be coded as masculine. I don't at all find it surprising that Dr. Robby's moment coincides with the second Trump presidency, much like the saintly, emotionally open, yet incredibly strong Jack Pearson of This Is Us took off during the first Trump presidency. But let's go back to The Last of Us and look at the young female part of this equation. Ellie is explicitly queer, maybe even the only example of this trope to feature a character that is textually queer rather than coded as queer, though please comment if you know of any others. As with Pascal and Joel, we can look at Ellie's place in pop culture and our broader cultural realities to draw conclusions about where we are in this current moment. It's no secret that the queer part of The Last of Us has drawn praise and interest, as well as criticism and disdain from fans, viewers, and the culture at large. The actor playing Ellie, Bella Ramsey, has specifically received criticism for their physical appearance and a portrayal that some fans of the video game on which the show is based feel isn't right, for some reason. Bella themselves is queer and non-binary, whereas the woman portraying Ellie in the video game is not, as far as I know, queer or openly queer. So there's a particular subtext to some of the criticism that feels tied to Bella's identity. In fact, this season has been review bombed by viewers who dislike the explicitly queer romance storyline for Ellie in this season, and the sad fact that Joel's character dies in the second episode, putting the rest of the story on the shoulders of a young queer girl, sans a mentor slash guardian. Couple all of that context with the fact that, according to GLAAD's annual report, LGBTQ characters on TV are down 36%, and many queer-focused shows like High School, about the high school experience of singers Tegan and Sarah, or A League of Their Own have been canceled after only one season. And we can see The Last of Us as a particularly interesting piece of media in this moment. I'd argue that The Last of Us and its take on the pseudo father-daughter trope arrived at just the right time. A time when peak TV and the explosion of queer content associated with its heyday had crested, just prior to the second Trump age, where we could all fall in love with the softness of Pedro Pascal, cheer for the queer episodes in season 1, and then watch the fallout as Joel dies during a second Trump term. There's no more Joel and Ellie because there is no more Joel. But the way their dynamic explored a familiar one in storytelling is important. It tells us that men and the way in which they subvert our expectations of masculinity, even as they are emblematic of them, and girls and the way they read as vulnerable, even as they are so much more complicated, strong, and unusual, perhaps queerer, than that feminine descriptor allows, are interesting to us, especially in times like these. Thanks so much for listening. This is a Queer Cinema Catchup video essay. Please like and subscribe. Leave your comments and thoughts on the pseudo father-daughter dynamic in media below. Check out our other videos. And yeah, thanks so much. Have a great one. Happy Father's Day.